Welcome, everybody. My name is Christina, and I will be on the back helping with some of the webinar logistics. So if you have any issues with your sound during the webinar, just feel free to send me a note, and we'll hopefully get that resolved for you. So welcome again to SoapUI 101, load testing with SoapUI. So before we get started, just want to go over some few housekeeping items. This class is indeed being recorded, so we will send you a copy over email over the next few days so you can rewatch the training or watch it with your team. We encourage everyone to download the handout that has material pertaining to specifically to this class, and you can find that handout under the handout section in the GoToWebinar panel. And we want to make this class as interactive as possible. So if you have a question about SoapUI and load testing, please add your question to the chat box or the question box, depending on where you're coming in from. And last but not least, we want to hear from you. We want to make these classes best we can for you as our users and customers. So please encourage you to answer our exit survey at the end of this class so we can better suit the classes to make them even greater for you. So at this point in time, I'm going to hand it off to Dana, who's going to talk a little bit about the learning opportunities that we're going to be rolling out in 2017 and today. All right. Hey, Dana.
Thank you, Christina. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana.
Skipped ahead. Hold on.
Oh, sorry. I'm Dana Rogozensky here, Customer Education at SmartBear, and we are adding in SoapUI free training classes under our SmartBear Academy umbrella. And today is the first of the classes that we are offering, load testing with SoapUI. We also have a January session scheduled, API monitoring, with SoapUI on January 24th, and then on February 8th, an API mocking with SoapUI. There are registration links in the handout, and Christina is sharing them into the chat box as well, so you're able to log into those. So we're excited to be starting these free classes, and if there's any specific topics, there will be an exit survey as well that you can fill in some information of what you'd like to see as users of SoapUI down the future. So the team here today with myself, you met Christina. We have Tamil Sanchez, one of our technical engineers here at SmartBear, who's going to be running the training for us. And then on hand to be helping and answering questions as he comes through is Harsh, the product marketing manager for the API team here at SmartBear. So send your questions in through each of the sections. Tamil will be pausing to answer as many questions as possible, and we'll look to publish these in the community for any that we didn't get to keep the conversations going. So without any further delay, I will hand it over to Tamil to go over the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dana. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is the fundamentals of load testing and the importance of it. Then we'll move over to creating a basic SoapUI test case, very high level. We initially skipped over this last time, but it sounds like a lot of users really want to know how to get started from scratch with SoapUI. So I'll go over it really high level, but I will show you the different ways that you can import your APIs into SoapUI. From there, we will create a load test. It's a couple of steps, really simple to do if you already have an end-to-end test case within SoapUI. This is a couple of clicks, super easy. Then we'll move on to building the actual load test. We'll give you an example of baselining or soap testing with some of the strategies that we provide out to you to reproduce realistic situations. Then we'll move on to setting up validations, right? We want to make sure that we're automatically notified if something is not performing the way we need it to perform or the way that we expect it to perform. And last but not least, we will open it up for questions and kind of dive into more of use cases that you guys may have seen or other questions that you may have. All right, so what's important about load testing? Why would you want to load test? Well, obviously there's a lot of reasons, right? On the functional side, you ensure that your APIs are functioning correctly. On the load side, you want to make sure that your APIs is ready for heavy load, right? For stress amounts of load, because your APIs are maybe public and need to be accessed by multiple users. They will not just be accessed by one user. You also want to detect your backend services. You want to make sure that they're always up and running, that you're not overwhelming the servers, and if you are, that you provide the necessary resources to these servers so that they can feed your services. Isolate scenarios, right? So this is important. Sometimes you have third-party APIs. You want to make sure that these third-party APIs don't slow your applications down. You want to make sure that they're performing the way that they advise that they initially would. That they usually have SLAs, and you want to make sure that they're keeping up to what they promise. Check API reliability. Your APIs may be fast, but is it giving you the correct response every single time, right? Yes, it responds fine when I do one request at a time, but what happens if I'm overwhelming the service? Does it have a different behavior because of these, right? So that's another reason why you want to load test. Finally, we want to make sure that the capabilities of your third-party API, as I mentioned, are there, and you want to ensure that your API scales very well, again, under heavy amounts of load. Okay, so we went over these. So some of the concepts and some of the wordage that I'm going to use are going to revolve around first concurrent users, virtual users, threads, or simultaneous runs. These all mean the same thing in the load testing industry. Okay, they basically mean the sequence or the way that you execute these API calls. Okay, and normally we do it at the same time. So when you hear concurrent virtual users, how many virtual users are you running, or simultaneous threads, we really mean simultaneous API executions. Load profiles or strategies are basically the types of load that you're implementing. Okay, if you want to implement, for example, a ramp-up load to see the breaking point of your API, basically you're aggregating users over time, and in the graph it would look like a straight line going upwards, right? Interpreting test results and statistics and metrics. So the statistics and metrics are one of the most important things when you're performance testing, because it's great to have features and functionality that will allow you to implement load and change the amount of load, but what really matters is how your API is responding to these. And the way to understand it is via these statistics and metrics that are provided. Okay, so hopefully you have graphs, hopefully you have numbers of how they are responding and how many milliseconds, what is the average response times, and these type of metrics is what will help you understand what type of load your APIs can take and if you're actually achieving SLA industry standards. Okay, and importance of simulating real world traffic, right? Your APIs are going to be used in a certain way depending on what they do. A good example that I give usually is a GPS service. So a GPS service will show bursts of load because first of all you have the early morning commuters. Okay, they're using GPS to check for traffic to make sure that they're taking the best routes, and this is the moment where this GPS service has the most usage. Okay, so it goes up, ramps up, probably 1 or 2 hours between the morning times, and you could replicate that with a scenario like load, right? When 1 or 2 hours go by in the morning, let's say 10 o'clock in the morning, it'll ramp back down to a certain amount, but again, it'll ramp back up at 5, 6 p.m. when everybody's trying to get back home. So these type of situations is what you actually want to replicate, and you can do that by using strategies or scenarios. Okay, and we'll talk more about that. So those are the end of my slides. And before I actually go into demo mode, I'm going to switch it over back to Christina for a few moments, make sure that we get some things answered from you guys to ensure that that we move things along the right track.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tamil, for that original and fantastic display and understanding fundamentals of load testing. So we're going to go ahead and ask you a few poll questions. So the first question is, which of the following best describes the primary reason you use SoapUI? So take a moment. All right, we're going to wait a few moments and then we will release the results. Any guess for which selection is going to win, Tamil?
So earlier I said I explore APIs. That was my earlier answer. I'll say now I create functional tests for APIs. Maybe our afternoon users use it a little more heavily.
All right, we're going to let it go for just another moment, and then we're going to release the results. So hopefully Tamil wins. Don't skew the answers. All right, at this point, we're going to close out the poll and share the results. All right, so which of the following best describes the primary reason you use SoapUI. So neck and neck up there. Good estimation.
I was close this time.
Yeah. So the next two polls, we're going to fly through them very quickly, and this is just to learn more about you guys as users, okay? So we're going to launch them right now. And then we will get on with the training, and it's all going to be within the product. So take a moment. What is your experience with load testing? And this will absolutely help us better coordinate trainings in the future to let you know where you are with certain skills and whatnot. And we are getting a question about the slides, and what we're going to go ahead and do is we'll have more of the details in the handout, so a lot of this information isn't necessarily required in the slides, but we will make them available. All right, closing. And then the next one is, which of the following best describes your current role? And then after these three polls, I'm going to give Tamil presentation rights, and we're going to go right into the product. So thank you all for your patience. All right, fantastic.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for answering those poll questions. They're usually really helpful to make us even more successful in delivering these training that we do. Thank you very much for that. Well, anyways, this to a lot of you is very familiar. This user interface. This is basically SoapUI 5.2.1. SoapUI is a tool that's been around for a very long time, hence the name Soap. We do support RESTful services just as well as SOAP services. That's some questions that we had from a previous webinar this morning. So we do support REST very, very well, as well as other protocols. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your heads. Now, to get started here, you have multiple options, and that will definitely depend on what type of services you have. If you're trying to import a SOAP web service, you will need a WSDL definition. You point to a WSDL definition, and Ready API will iterate through it and understand the actual operations and give you sample requests for it. Okay. If you're dealing with a SOAP service, you could start with a simple URL. Okay, to that actual endpoint. You could provide a WADL definition, a Swagger definitions, and a couple of others. Regardless of how you start, okay, you could start by providing a Swagger, providing a WSDL. We'll basically import your APIs, and you'll get something that looks like this initial piece up here. Okay, these here are basically the.
So Tamil, we've had a request when you're showing those screens, that area right there. I want to just focus in a little bit.
Sure. Let me see if give me one moment.
If you can't, not a problem, and we can have people can zoom in with their own views too.
Okay, let's see if this helps out. Okay, I can't zoom in for some reason.
Not a problem. We'll just go ahead and continue. Apologies for.
Yeah. So basically, when you import your APIs, these little arrows represent interfaces, and each of these interfaces would be the APIs that you have imported. For example, we have a let's see. I usually use this web service, which basically represents an e-commerce web service, right? That you log in, you buy something, you can log out. Before you log out, you can search for whatever you want to buy with the search item. And a simple request, an HTTP transaction looks like this, okay? And these can be sequenced into steps within SoapUI so that they can run sequentially, right? If you're in a realistic world, you want to have something that looks more like this. Okay, we have a login step, which basically logs in with username and password, a search step that will generate the session ID from the previous login, search for an item, buy an item, and finally log out. Okay, so when you have this sequence of steps, you can execute them sequentially and validate their functionality. Okay, now the true focus of this training session is our load testing capabilities. But that's how you basically get started with SoapUI Pro. Does anybody have any specific questions when it comes to creating a SoapUI test case, when it comes to importing your APIs into SoapUI 5.2.1?
So if you have a question, go ahead and just add it to the chat box. Is there anything particular you'd like to highlight, Jamil?
Yeah, so again, Swagger is a basic definition language. I'm not sure if you guys are very familiar with it. It's to REST, so you can compare it to what a WSDL is SOAP. Okay, and there's multiple definition standards out there. Swagger is one of the predominant ones in the industry, and just a little more information. It was acquired. The company was actually acquired by SmartBear, and we donated the spec to the Open API initiative. Okay, and a little bit of information, RESTful API doesn't necessarily need to be defined by a description, a standard, but if it is, it's much, it can be structured in a much better way, easier to maintain for developers, and tools like Ready API can easily understand these standard definitions. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, good. So far we've seen how you could import the APIs into Ready API and how you could build a test case out of it. Next, how do we create a load test? How do we create a load test? It's actually really simple. So within the test case itself, you have a load testing option here. And all you really need to do is right-click, new load UING test, and you can name it, and it'll import those sequential steps that you originally have. Okay, that's all it really takes. From here, this is where you would actually represent the different types of loads and the amounts of load that you could implement. Okay, so that is pretty straightforward. We're now in the load testing cycles, and the first things we want to think about is how do you want to load test your web services? Okay, so if you're new to load testing, if you haven't tested a specific web service, if it's brand new, the best thing to do is to start off a baseline load test. Okay, and that's what this specific strategy does. Okay, it implements a specific amount of concurrent users or threads and does not fluctuate, therefore giving you the ability to understand how the API responds to this steady amount of users. Okay, after you have a baseline, then you can go and implement more complicated types of load tests. We do provide a couple of different strategies within SoapUI, which include burst. So this will cover a bit about what I've talked about earlier with the GPS strategy, where you have bursts of times that a lot of users are going to simultaneously hit your APIs, and then you can see the reactions from those bursts, and when they ramp back down, how does that look, right? Simple is what we're going to use today. Thread gives you the ability to manipulate just the amount of threads and maybe have an increment. So if you want to see the breaking point of your APIs, you can have threads aggregate every second or every minute or something like that. Okay, and variance basically gives you the ability to kind of randomize the amount of load that you're throwing at your APIs. Today we're going to use simple strategy, and now I'm going to explain the different ways that this can be configured. Okay, so threads again. So threads are the amount of concurrency in which we're going to hit the web service that we have here, and in this case there's 4 steps, so it's these 4 steps 5 times at the same time. But right now I'm going to increase that to 20 so we could get better information about it. Okay, test delay is the amount of breathing time that we give between thread execution. So right now we have 20, and we're saying, hey, we're going to give 1 millisecond of breathing time until it sends the next 20 concurrent users or threads. Okay, and random actually allows you to be a little more dynamic with this breathing time. With this 0.5 random rate, what I'm saying is it could actually fluctuate. The breathing time can fluctuate from anywhere from half of what I have selected to the full amount. Okay, so from 500 milliseconds to 1,000 milliseconds. The last piece here on the right, all the way on the right-hand side, is the amount of time that you want to run the load test for. Or you may want to limit it by concurrent users. So if you were incrementing the amount of load to see the breaking point of your APIs, maybe there's a limit, right? Maybe you have a limit already that you know. You may not want to do it by time execution, but maybe by total amount of runs, which can be a very high number. Okay. One thing to note is that SoapUI provides an introduction to load testing. There are other functionalities that you may need if you're really serious and you're ready to take that next step to load testing. We could talk a little more about that later on. But for right now, this is a simplified test, and we can actually execute it and get back results. But before I execute this test, okay, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Everybody understands how you can very easily build the load test from SoapUI and how you can configure the type of load that you want to implement and the amount of load. Does anybody have any specific questions about these things?
And Hirsch is doing a fantastic job of answering some individual questions as well along the way. So appreciate that, Hirsch. So everyone, please, we encourage you to continue to ask your questions. So we're looking for any questions pertaining to the topic Tamil just went over. We see some coming in, so want to check them out, Tamil?
Yeah, I lost my questions. Let me. All right, guys. So some people little confused about test delay and random. Okay, so test delay is the amount of breathing time that you want to give between running executions, between running simultaneous executions or threads, right? So that's this number over here. Okay. Now, the random basically randomizes the 1,000 milliseconds that I have set up, and the randomize is anywhere from half of what I have set all the way to total. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. That question came in. Angeles is asking, how do you save test settings in order of reuse? So if you're talking about the actual interactions with the API, remember, I used SoapUI test case to build a functional test and sequence them, and I'm basically using that same exact test case. Okay, so I'm using this login, search, buy, and log out. It's using that same sequence. If I were to switch the sequence within the test case, it would switch it within my load test. Hopefully that makes sense. So somebody asked, what is the difference between the SOAP project and what is it and the REST project? SOAP and REST are two completely different structured protocols. SOAP is mostly based on XML envelope structure. So basically you have a SOAP call that has an envelope that encapsulates a SOAP message. I mean, it's structured very, very rigorously. RESTful is a bit more modern technique, a more modern framework, or I should say protocol, that basically allows it to be a little more open. It's not structured in such a way where it requires an envelope, but it's basically based on HTTP verbs like get, put, and you could, it's a lot less structured, so there's more you could do with it. But it's also said in the industry that SOAP is a little more secure just because it is structured. Okay. Of a SOAP protocol, a message would look like, here, I'll give you an example. It would look like this. Okay, so we have a SOAP envelope that encapsulates the headers and body. So these will hold the parameters that you're sending to your requests, okay, and to your services. And your services expect this format and parameters within it.
All right, and so we'll get to some more questions as we move along, and let's see something in particular that you want to touch upon.
All right, guys, so back to our load test. Before I continue, let's kind of summarize what we've seen so far. Okay, we've imported our web services and APIs. They can be imported by using different definition standards like Swagger or Whistle if you're dealing with SOAP. They can be imported by you simply providing a URL. Okay, once we've imported it, we sequence some steps by using our functional testing piece. Okay, we have a functional testing tool within SoapUI that allows you to sequence these steps and validate the functionality with some other features. But we're taking advantage of us already having having these functional tests, and we basically are reinventing them. We're reusing them to load test. And now that we have configured the load test the way that we needed to have, now we can actually run it. Okay, so again, 20 concurrent users. We're just baselining by using our simple strategy, and our breathing time between threads will be anywhere from 500 milliseconds to 1,000 milliseconds. This load test will run for about 60 seconds, which is a minute, and we'll get some meaningful data out of this. As you can see, we could see real-time metrics. Okay, and I'll wait till this finishes before getting into more information about those.
And one thing we are doing is we're showing all the questions that are coming in because we think it's really critical for everyone to hear what different customers have and what different users of SoapUI are asking. So all of the questions are showing up on your GoToWebinar chat, but we like the visibility. So apologies if it's a little bit busy.
All right, guys, so we're hitting the end of this load test. It's taking about a minute. There's a bunch of numbers. What do these all really mean? Well, things that you need to understand and may want to get from your APIs are minimum amount of requests in a given load test, maximum amount of time taken of this particular load test, average. And we lay all these out in this nice little box over here. Okay, very meaningful information if you guys are looking to see how your APIs are performing against a specific type of load. Now, we also provide smaller graphs that will identify a couple of different things. So this particular graph will give you information about the total execution. Right, so we have thread count, which is the amount of concurrent users or threads that we were executing. As you can see, that green line is steady. We did not fluctuate. We implemented a baseline load profile, which is called simple. Okay, we're just trying to understand how this API behaves when hitting it with a steady amount of load, and that's where you could go from if you want to get a little more complex. Okay, we've seen average in milliseconds, average response time in milliseconds. That's this blue line. So initially it started around here. You can see that first dot. It's a little difficult to see, but if you could just see it started around here, it spiked up for the beginning of the load test, and that's because of the beginning impulse towards that API. And then it slowly ramped down to regular numbers. Okay. Transactions per second is in the order of which how many transactions that actually went and came back from the API per second, and bytes is the amount of data that was being processed from this API. Okay, so this is a very simple graph. This is what our SoapUI tool provides, so that you could better understand what type of behavior your APIs handled while implementing this amount of load. So that's pretty simple things. Quick check here. This is one of the most important things when you're load testing, right? Because you can have functionality to implement load. Okay, you can have functionality to change the amount of load or the type of load, but what really matters are these metrics, because this is the proof that your APIs are performing well or not. Okay, and without this, you really wouldn't know how your APIs are performing. So I'm gonna turn around and answer a couple more questions here that I see. Okay, so there's a question here that says, how can I run load tests on more than one machine? For instance, if I want to increment the load to a very large amount, this cannot be done from one resource, so I may need multiple machines. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I just want to remind everybody that SoapUI is meant, the load testing here is meant for introductory load testing. If you guys want to take it a step further, we do have a licensed product called LoadUI Pro. And LoadUI Pro has functionality that will allow you to use agents to distribute the load test across geographical locations or any infrastructure to reproduce real amounts, really high level amounts of load. Okay. There's another question here. Is there a way to health check the servers that the APIs depend on? That's also a very good question, and it's really advanced as well. Unfortunately, this is something that's really, really important. And again, SoapUI is meant for introductory load testing. This is another functionality that will be available within our license tool. Since you guys asked a couple of things here, I may move on towards the end of the load test and kind of show you some of the same things in our Pro tool. Very light. I won't go over it too much, but just so that you guys understand that.
And really, we appreciate all the questions, everyone. So thank you for keeping them coming. We'll be compiling answers and posting the common questions to our community. So please be on the lookout for some good, valuable information and takeaways from this class today.
So good question by Ranjan. So Ranjan is asking, until what load SoapUI is good to use? Our recommendation is 100 concurrent users. Obviously, that can be skewed a little bit depending on what you're load testing, right? Because if you're just testing a very simple GET request or a very simple SOAP call, okay, you can probably scale to a lot more than 100 concurrent users and get realistic metrics back. But if it's a lot more complex and just a simple call, it can get very complicated. And SoapUI is really not meant to scale very, very high. Okay, so our recommendation is 100 concurrent users. You can definitely, select a lot more, but to get realistic metrics, you have to be wary of what type of, API call and what it's actually doing. Is it getting media files? Is it just a GET request? Or it could be something a lot more complex that will, be below 100 concurrent users. Yes, the rock, I mentioned earlier that some of the terminology that I use would be threads, concurrent users, virtual users. All these mean the same exact things in the load testing world. So when you hear me say concurrent users, I mean threads, or I might use virtual users as well interchangeably. Does SoapUI support SSL authentication? Absolutely. So SSL authentication is really common in the API space. HTTPS endpoints. You have to make sure that you add your certificates. That could be done in the preferences section of SoapUI. Other types of authentication styles that go away from the actual HTTP endpoints, things like OAuth or things like basic authentication. Things that are very common in the API industry, we support right out of the box. Okay. How do we control data, for example? What if I need to simulate a test by logging in with different users? That's a great question. It's not a simple task to achieve that in the SoapUI base version, in this SoapUI tool. Within our Pro functions, we have data-driven capabilities that will allow you to assign, either Excel files full of users or maybe a database, a SQL query that you make against a database, and you can have these distributed amounts amongst the virtual users or threads. And you could achieve that really simply with our licensed version. Does time delay apply only to the start of the call of the 4 APIs, login, search, logout, or does that apply to? So the time delay, the test delay that we have here, will only apply after the first 20 concurrent executions. Okay, so this runs 20 times at the same time. We'll give a delay, and then it will run 20 times again. If you want to implement delays in between steps, that can be done by modifying the actual test flow. So you could add a time delay between each test. I'll give you a quick example. Delay, and now we have delays in between login and search, and as you can see, those always take effect in our load side. So the modification that I made was over here on the functional side, but again, it's a one-to-one match to whatever you have on the load side. All right, guys, so I'm going to quick recap of what we've seen. We've seen how you can import your APIs, how to sequence them using the functional side, how you can create a load test out of that sequence, how to create a load test, right, depending on what your APIs and web services do, how to implement different types of load and increment the amount of load that you're implementing. Okay, we've seen how you can get valuable stats from it, how you can look at metrics that are really meaningful, and finally how you can report on them. The next piece that we want to take a look at are load test assertions. Okay, so assertions are really, really important, and basically assertions are rules to automatically validate your test. On the functional side, we validate the functionality. On the rest side, on the load side, we validate scalability. We have a bunch of different assertions that will validate things like SLAs, right? If you have really strict SLAs, you want to check your step averages and say, hey, my SLA is 800, so I should never have an average over 800 milliseconds. Okay, and sometimes there may be some error handling that you could say, hey, for a period of time or for an amount of time, I will accept a little bit over, right? But that's just some tolerance level that I understand can be undertaken under heavy amounts of load. But all of these can definitely be manipulated with assertions. You can definitely validate one specific call, okay, from the list that you have within your load test, or you could do maybe a total of everything that will basically look at the load test itself. Okay, so again, assertions really important. They allow you to validate the scalability of your APIs automatically. Obviously, you don't want to sit here and look at every single little number to see if your SLAs are not being met. If you add assertions, they will automatically populate and raise red flags when they do reach that level. So very good question. Can you execute SoapUI test, load test outside of the tool, maybe via Jenkins? Yes. And this is a question that comes up really often. Okay. SoapUI and all of our tool sets are really agnostic to what you're using. They can be executed outside of the tool with simple command line arguments. Okay, there's parameters in our command line arguments that will allow you to say, hey, run load test 1, 2, and 3. And basically, you could create batch files out of these, or you could create a Jenkins job out of these, and they will be executed automatically. All right, guys, so really high level. We talked a lot about load testing today. Again, can't stress this enough. SoapUI 5.2.1 will give you an introductory segue into load testing, but definitely take a look at our Load UING tool. Okay, I'm going to bring it up really quick and kind of answer some questions that we had earlier about this tool. Load UING basically allows you to go to the next steps. Okay, so things like that baseline test that we've created will be able to be accomplished with simple templates that we have. These templates will build the load test for you as long as you provide the endpoints that you want to load test. Okay, but then we have even more advanced functionalities like distribution. Distribution will give you the ability to distribute your load tests across the globe or maybe internally, right? If you're trying to reach 20,000 concurrent users, that probably cannot be accomplished by one server. Okay, you will need multiple servers to accomplish that, and it's made easy with distribution. Basically, you generate agents, you install agents on these servers, and forward the load test to them. Monitoring. Monitoring is another huge performance testing, because with monitoring, you could actually monitor your API's resources. Okay, so if your API is sitting on the Unix server and they're depending on Tomcat, you want to make sure that the resources that are provided by these entities are sufficient to cover the amount of load that they're handling on a day-to-day basis. And I mean, we monitor a bunch of different types of entities like databases and JVM, and these are all things that APIs depend on. Statistics here. We saw statistics on the SoapUI tool. These statistics are made to be even more granular. Okay, this is the type of things that you need to look for when you're load testing, right? You want to ensure that your APIs are scaling well. You want to understand. So we do give you the ability to be very dynamic when it comes to pulling the metrics. So if you want to granular and go into the logout section and say, hey, I only want to get data from this specific API call, you could go in and say, hey, I want to see time taken 90th percentile, 25th percentile, and maybe total transactions, so that you could actually compare against how many API calls came in, and you'll get those metrics. These statistics tab is really advanced. It also allows you to baseline runs and to compare runs against time. So if you run this load test one more time, maybe for 5 seconds, you will be able to go back in time after those 5 seconds and overlap the initial metrics that you had to the ones that you have now. Okay, and that's really important when you have developers trying to really take a step forward when it comes to improving performance and identifying that the performance improvement were actually achieved. Okay, and yes, all of this can be automated in SoapUI base version. It can be automated as well. We're really agnostic, as I mentioned, with any tools that you guys may be using. So if you're using things like Jenkins, Bamboo, TeamCity, right, TFS, any of the above are tools that are used in the industry to automate the processes. So these can definitely be reused. The way that we work with automation, whether you're using really advanced tools like the ones that I mentioned, or maybe you're just trying to schedule a process, all of this can be identified by simple command line executions. And within our tool, you can automatically generate that with a couple of clicks, and then provide that to a Jenkins job, or create a batch file or a cron job in a Unix system. And this will give you the capability to automate the services. All right, guys, so hopefully, that's some good introduction to a little more advanced load testing when you guys are ready to take that step further. Now, I'm going to revert back to some of the questions that you have and read them out loud here. Okay, so somebody's requesting to show assertions. Apologize for not capturing that. So let's take a look. Assertions are set up, as I mentioned, via the assertions tab, and there's a bunch of different assertions that you could set up to. So let's say we have a max amount of errors assertion. No, I probably will not get errors, so let's use average. Okay, so my average response time, I want it to be no longer than 100 milliseconds. Eventually, if I hit this tool hard enough, it'll probably go way over that. So let's increment the concurrent users. Let's execute the load test one more time, and now my assertion over here will validate that my maximum does not go over 100 milliseconds. As you can see, we have a little icon here that identifies the failure of this assertion because my maximum is already way over what my expectation was. So this is the type of feature that will allow you to easily validate whether your SLAs or your expectancies are not being met. Hopefully that answers the assertions question. Um, on the open source, on the SoapUI tool here, we have no real way of reporting this. In some of our more advanced tools, there are further things that you can report on and actually look into for performance testing. So somebody's asking, this is a very good question, and I'm more than happy to definitely show that off a little bit. Josh Handler is asking, Tamil said, you can import Swagger setup to generate sample scenarios. Can you show that or that lesson results? One of our vendors' APIs have Swagger used for the testing, but not automated. Okay, so again, this tool is completely it can integrate with Swagger very easily. Swagger is a tool that SmartBear acquired via acquiring its company and donated to the open source and to Open API initiative. So I'm going to quickly show a sample Swagger definition so you guys can see what it looks like. I'll actually Google it here while I'm on the webinar. And a very well known Swagger definition is the pet store. And when you go into the Swagger definition, you'll be able to identify the actual location of where the JSON definition looks like. And from here, you can import it into your process by simply right-clicking on your project, import Swagger, and providing where that Swagger definition is located. Once you do, you can take a look at all the resources that Swagger definition describes, add them to test cases, and let's say brand new test case, and from there you will be able to load test it. Again, as you can see, this is done with a couple of clicks, and you can start introducing load tests against a specific add pet request. If you wanted to sequence something a little more realistic, you'll have to set that up by reusing the sample requests that are provided to you under the interface. Hopefully that makes sense, Josh. Don't want to overwhelm everybody else with these things. If you have further questions about this, feel free to send them to us. Contact SmartBear. We have some emails that we're sharing with you guys. So definitely reach out to us if you have further questions about anything else.
And actually, that's a really great segue too, where Tamil, if there are certain things you would like to be in our SmartBear Academy free training for SoapUI classes, always a great way to communicate this to us is through our exit survey at the end of the webinar, or you can email us at customers@smartbear.com. Our next topic is API monitoring, and then after that would be API mocking. But if there's something that you in particular would like to see, always share that information with the team here.
Does SoapUI support RAML? So RAML is supported on, I know it's supported for a fact in the SoapUI Pro version. Not sure if it's supported on the base version. Okay, so Armit, thank you very much. It seems like RAML is supported on the base version as well, as he's mentioning. I know that we're depending on an external plugin for it, so you may, if you don't see the options, you may need to install it. And it seems like it is compatible with the base version. So that's a good question. For 60 seconds, it's hard to calculate right off the top because it gives me a random amount of breathing time, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 milliseconds. But roughly, you can definitely see the total amount of executions by looking at the count. So the total amount of executions for this test was 880. Again, it's a little difficult to calculate if you're not looking at the tool because it randomizes the breathing time anywhere from 500 milliseconds to 1,000 milliseconds. And that was a question by Sunil. Hopefully that makes sense. So Ujala, I guess this is a question for Christina. They have questions. This is the first time they've accessed this training. They want to know if there's easy ways of accessing previous trainings of the SmartBear Academy.
So good news, you're here on our first training, so hopefully we'll continue to develop the program, everything. So what we encourage everyone to do is to actually bookmark this page that I'll share in the chat box, and that's going to include our future trainings and anything else we have in store, including recordings. So we're going to build out that section on our website. So this is a great page to check out. And because it's our first training, we'll have the first recording available for you via email, as with the email that you registered within a week or so, but we will also post it to that site and to our user community as soon as it's ready. So hopefully that answered your questions, but again, always email us at customers@smartbear.com if you need additional information on where to access our recordings. So there's a great question. Is there a plan to release a new version of SoapUI? So quick question and a quick answer there. We will be releasing a new version in the next week or so, so please be on the look for what's going to be kind of featured in that next release. But we haven't released in, I think, her share with about a year, so it's going to be a great time. That's why we're releasing our SmartBear Academy free training, a new release of SoapUI. So we're definitely trying to do a lot to encourage and improve everything, all things SoapUI. So all for you guys.
All right, so some Arit has a little more advanced question, and let's see if we could analyze this really quick. Can you explain behind the scenes scenario? Let's say in my functional test for buy API, I prioritize all the products available, example, 100 products. So load test will run on all products or only run products again and again. So the key word there is parameterization, right? In SoapUI, you can parameterize values. Okay, so you put values in. If you have 100 products, you probably have to do some Groovy scripting in SoapUI to pass all these products. If you're using the licensed version, we have a data source step, as I mentioned earlier, which allows you to query a database or get your products from an Excel spreadsheet or other files, and you could loop through these. And these will be assigned to all the concurrent users that you have. So if you have 100 products, you're testing with 10 concurrent users, it'll take 10 products at a time, and the products will be different. Again, that's by using the data-driven capabilities of the licensed versions. Hopefully that makes sense, Amit, I'm sorry. Ujala has a questions about certification. Do you also provide certification? Oh, it seems like, okay, good. So that was answered already. Thank you very much for that, Hirsch.
So why don't we explain a little bit of that? So we do have a, for $99, you can, dollars or wherever you may be located, apologies for just saying dollars, but we do have a SoapUI certification for purchase, and I'll add a link to the chat box if anyone's interested in testing their knowledge, and you do indeed get a certificate, and that's through our preferred partner, Wise Clouds. They helped us build the curriculum and the certification. So.
All right, so Tom Bellinger has a very good question, and I apologize for mentioning the licensed version over, but some of these questions unfortunately cannot be done with the introductory version of SoapUI. Tom Bellinger's question is, does SoapUI allow for loading of externally referenced JavaScripts or Groovy scripts, then executed methods in the scripts within the suite's test steps, which then can be parameters and other steps? So the reason that I'd like to answer these questions is because it seems like you guys are a bit more advanced. You can put libraries, okay, externally. They will not be able to be consumed easily within the SoapUI base version, but they can be imported very easily with the versions. All right, guys. So any last questions? Okay, seems like we have a whole batch of questions coming in, so let's take some time to look at those.
Yeah, this is really fantastic, everyone. Thank you for your participation.
All right, so the it's trying to say load IU NG. It's actually load UI Pro. Okay.
Load UI NG Pro.
Thank you, Christina. Is load test skips some steps like Groovy data source available in functional tests as well as I want to load test these APIs? So everything is a mirror to whatever you have set up on the test case. Okay. If you want to maybe disable or remove some steps, what I recommend is maybe copying the test case or cloning it by right-click of a button, say clone test case. This will clone the test case, and then you can remove the steps that you think will harm your load test. Regarding load testing specifically for burst strategies, I get good or strategies, but the burst strategy will have failures. The failures would be 60 to 70% into the test. I'm not sure how to imprint these results. What could this mean? So Anthony, it's really hard to say without looking at the actual setup, how much concurrent user you're using, what the API actually does, the sequence of the steps that you build. This is a great question for the community, so please, if you're using SoapUI, paste it in our community. Our support engineers are definitely going through these communities and looking at them. If not, reach out to us. Okay, we'll definitely take a look at it and point you to easier methods if needed.
And also, while in the community, we've seen some really exceptional users on our call today, and they even helped you answer a few questions to Emil. So we encourage also, as SoapUI customers and users, to answer questions that you see open. So we want you to be interactive and engage in our community as well.
Anthony Wilder has a very good question. Should you attach assertions to test steps or to load tests? You should do it to both. When you attach assertions to test steps, you're validating their functionality. Okay. When you attach them to the load test, you're validating the scalability. While you're load testing, you should still be functionally testing your APIs because the amount of concurrency in which your APIs are being used should not change their functionality. So again, you could do it in both. Remember, you're reusing the test case, so these will bring over the functional assertions that they already have. The errors that you see here, ERR, this stands for the errors in which the failures of the assertions that you built on the functional side are occurring. Can load test be configured to run multiple test cases? In the base version, again, this is an introductory, segue into load testing. You cannot set that up. That's a licensed version functionality. All right, guys. Hopefully, this was a great session for you guys. Hopefully, everybody got their questions answered. I know there might have been some outstanding ones. Again, feel free to reach out to the email that was provided. Ask your questions. If you want anything else, if you want any other type of introduction to the tool, to let us know, and we'll try our best to answer those. At this point, I've seen a lot today. Hopefully, there was a lot of takeaway. I'll switch back to Christina now. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. A round of, just really pleased with today's training and how interactive everyone was. I think it really makes for a great training when people are asking questions and our team here is able to engage with you all. So appreciate everyone's attendance and participation during the class. And more than anything, hope to see you next month. We're going to be focusing on API monitoring, and we'll be going into detail on how to get started in SoapUI with API monitoring. We hope to see you next class, and please, we encourage you to take a moment and answer our survey at the end of this class so we can better understand what you guys, as our customers, want to see in future trainings and such. So thanks to Emil, thanks Hirsch, thanks Dana, and more than anything, thank all of you guys for joining today, and we look forward to our next class and all future classes. So thanks. And you will receive a copy of this class within the next week or so. All right, bye-bye.